Another week, another episode of the TMH Sportscast. Liam Hickey with me. I'm Zach Cohen. It's been a roller coaster of a month for the Miami Hurricanes, but they finally get back in the win column. 38-10 victory over Syracuse. Liam, give me your thoughts on the game.
Just wow. What a performance from Miami. Probably the most emotionally charged game for a blowout of this caliber that I think I've ever witnessed. And just when you take into all the factors, the revenge game angle for Miami going into it, the flared tempers and hostilities between Fran Brown and Mario Cristobal on the sidelines, the students going tarps off in the student section, which I feel like ignited their whole resurgence into this game, and the saucy, showboaty tricks that Miami drawed up in the later end of this game that felt like they were directly meant to shove it at Syracuse. This game was way more intense than the scoreline would indicate, especially considering when this game was tied 0-0 in the first 27 minutes. So, a lot of stuff to get into. Zach, what are your immediate thoughts about the Syracuse game?
Well, I was initially worried. You mentioned 27 minutes, no scoring. I'm like, oh no, this is going to be bad. But Miami finally turns on the engines late in that second quarter and cruises to a victory throughout the second half. And I love the play calling because the plays are creative. I've been mentioning it for weeks that they need to go back to how they called the game against FSU, and it was pretty similar with the types of plays. The Francis Marinella touchdown, Carson Beck receiving touchdown, and it was fun to watch Miami football for 30 minutes in the second half, and yeah, it was just a good game overall. But Liam, I'll send it back to you to get it into the game recap of what really went down during the game.
Yeah, so we'll get into our game recap, and then we'll look ahead and give our college football playoff outlook for Miami, because while it seems like it's a very murky path, it is still narrowly possible for Miami to still make the college football playoffs somehow. And then we'll finish it off with an NC State preview before interviewing our Cory Smith of the Pack Pride podcast for 24/7 Sports. So a great episode coming today. But yeah, get into this recap. Like you said, Miami won 38-10, an absolute blowout. They improved to 7-2 on the season. Syracuse drops to 3-7. Not a great year for Syracuse. But when you just think about all the factors going into this game, the emotions were running high for the Hurricanes. You had Miami with a vendetta against Syracuse going into this. After last season losing 42-38, it was Syracuse's largest comeback in program history. And Miami was number 6 at the time. They were 10-1 going into that game at the JMA Wireless Dome at Syracuse's stadium. They dropped that game, and now they're out of the college football playoff picture on the last week of the season. So Miami definitely had something to prove in this game, and you could definitely tell that they were angry based on what they did later in that game. But unlike that shootout that we saw where it was a high-flying offenses on both sides, this game, the on-field product that we saw, was way more of just a stagnant slugfest for pretty much the entire first half. We saw for the first 27 minutes until about 2 minutes and change left to go in that second quarter. It was uninspiring. It was lethargic. It was indolent from Miami, whatever you want to call it. It was just not good offense. And this is kind of this recurring issue now that we've seen for the past 3 weeks out of the last 4 games. It has just been slow to start. We saw it against Stanford. We saw it against Louisville. And it has just not been good. And now we saw it against Syracuse. Really only SMU was the one time where we kind of had a better start, where we scored on one of our first drives and went up 7-0 early. And then we eventually, of course, forfeited that lead later on. But yet, Miami really needs to turn it around going into these next games against way better opponents, where they need to start scoring early, especially against NC State, which we'll get into because they are an offense that you cannot start slow against whatsoever. But going into this game recap, like I said, both teams, for the majority of the first half, were just trading punts. Miami got lucky that they didn't concede another first possession touchdown like they did against Stanford. Instead, it was saved to the end of the game when they got that garbage time touchdown for Syracuse to make it 38-10 instead of 38-3. But Miami's defense was really the only part of this whole unit that was keeping them in this game, because their offense was sputtering and they were faltering, and it was not good play to see, and it was really drawing some more questions onto this coaching staff until they changed course. And that all started, like I said, with 2 minutes and 13 seconds left in the second quarter. And it starts with one of their new wide receivers, the true freshman, another guy stepping up in a big moment with the likes of Mark Fletcher, CJ Daniels, and Tony Johnson all gone. We see Dalen Upshaw now making a big play for Miami. It was a 40-yard screen play, the first explosive action, I'd say, by the Hurricanes over the entire game up until that moment. And there actually was, listed if you were listening to the WVUM Sports broadcast on it, with Jay Monty and Carter Lutz on the call. Actually, I believe it was Gavin Bishow. There's some confusion in the booth because Dalen Upshaw was wearing number 15 and not his usual number 13. And so they were thinking it was somehow the third string quarterback, Judd Anderson. That was what they were thinking. And then they were like, okay, this can't be the case because Dalen Upshaw is, of course, wearing dreads. So obviously it's not going to be Judd Anderson there.
Yeah, Leo, I was in the press box. I'm looking at the roster. I'm like, 15's Judd Anderson. Like, who's that on the field? But finally got that clarification that it was Upshaw, and it made a bit more sense.
But it was so great that Upshaw stepped up because before that you had JoJo Trader dropping a crucial pass on a third down play that would have resulted in a first down, but instead resulted in a punt. That stopped Miami's momentum in the first quarter. Beck took some uncharacteristic sacks. The O-line was looking kind of porous to start the game, which was a little concerning as well. But this thing kind of started a new leaf, a new chapter in Miami's story for this game. And if you really want to attribute it to something, hey, maybe it was those fans going shirts off, because I feel like it was around that time when that movement started in the stadium. That's when Miami started really clicking. So, not to point fingers or to point out one specific event, but hey, maybe this needs to become a weekly tradition so Miami can get going. I don't know.
Yeah, I actually couldn't see the tarps off because the press box is right under 306, which is in the upper deck. I couldn't see it, but I got to see it on the Jumbotron. It was pretty funny, and yeah, just bring the juice on Saturday. That maybe the tarps off is a Miami magic trick of some kind.
I like that. I think they're definitely seeing that, and they're taking some inspiration. And so Beck throws that screen pass Upshaw. He runs for 41 yards down the sideline into Syracuse territory. Beck follows it up with a first down throw to Joshua Moore, another guy that's been getting activated now more so after the likes of C.J. Daniels and Tony Johnson have gone down in the recent weeks. And now, after that, you see some trickery by this offense, something that we've not really seen before, where Malachi Tony is once again at the epicenter of it. This time, he's throwing the ball to Carson Beck for a touchdown. Beck is unguarded in the end zone because really smart play from Shannon Dawson where they use Malachi Tony, who is obviously the most explosive, the best playmaker for this team on offense. He uses him as a decoy somewhat. He draws all the attention away from the other guys on the team, and there's no one, absolutely no one in the area of Beck, and so it's just a free touchdown where he could just walk it straight in. And so excellent play design there, and that leads Miami to go up 7-0 right before halftime, but then it looks like Syracuse is going to mount something and go the other way, if it isn't for Keontae Scott, who has been just a baller at defensive back for Miami this whole season. He gets the first pick six, the first defensive touchdown for the Hurricanes throughout the entire year, makes it 14-0, and it's a great way to end off this second half. And also, Syracuse still has some time on the board, and this time it seriously looks like they're going to go down and score once again, but the defense comes up large for the umpteenth time, and they fumble it in the red zone, Syracuse, with Yassine Willis, who had been excellent this whole day. He fumbles it. Jacoby Thomas, another really explosive and really awesome defensive back for this team, recovers it after Akeem Essador strips it from him, and it keeps Syracuse with goose eggs on the board going into halftime.
And I believe the last defensive touchdown for the Hurricanes was back when they played Wake Forest, and it was Mish Powell for the Hurricanes. And actually, when I was talking to Jaden Gonzalez from the Hurricane, he's like, Miami hasn't scored a defensive touchdown in a long time. When is it going to happen? It happened a few plays later with Keontae Scott, so he kind of called into existence there.
Yeah, give this guy his flowers. Jaden Gonzalez, a writer for the Miami Hurricane, he might be clairvoyant. He had multiple calls in that game where he said it and then it happened. But yeah, more on Keontae Scott. He's a Jim Thorpe semifinalist. He is second on the team in total tackles, tied second in sacks as a cornerback, and tied first in pass deflections. So this guy is just a game wrecker. He causes havoc on all levels. He's up there with Brandon Messidor, in my opinion, as the best defensive player. Maybe just a little bit behind them, but I'd still put him right in that category.
I thought Jacoby Thomas in the mix as well had another good game, but I see what you mean by the levels there.
Yeah, for sure. Both of them transfers from the SEC. Thomas coming from Tennessee, Keontae Scott coming from Auburn. And so going into the second half now, Syracuse responds with a field goal, but then Miami answers right after that with another touchdown drive. Keelan Marion rips off a 61-yard crib call. Carson Beck passes 10,000 total career yards. Only E.J. Warner of Fresno State is the only person to have accomplished that mark in all of FBS that is still playing right now.
And you wouldn't think E.J. Warner's that other quarterback. I looked it up. It was pretty interesting. And it seemed like at the wide receiver position, Shannon Dawson, Mario Crispo, they were playing the hot hands, seeing who's hot, who's ready to get that ball. Malachi Tony didn't have a great game. JoJo Trader started dropping some balls, and you sub in Josh Moore and Dalen Upshaw. And playing the hot hand was a solution that worked for the Hurricanes throughout that game. And obviously, Keelan Marion really stepped up with over 100 receiving yards.
It was one of the first plays of the entire year that reminded me of last year's offense and the fact that he just had acres of space to run into, and it seemed like one of those plays where Miami's offense just absolutely outdazzled the other defense, like Gambour did so many times over 2024. And this brings me to my 2 points, one of them being how Miami completed the middle eight mantra, where they succeeded in the first 4 minutes, or the last 4 minutes of the first half, and then the first 4 minutes of the second half. They dominated that interval of time, and that's really what led them to win this game, because that was where their most explosive plays and scores happened. And then my next point, and this brings me more again to Keelan Marion, and also another guy, Gerard Pringle, is the whole next man up philosophy that we're seeing take shape now, where you have guys going down, like we already mentioned. Mark Fletcher was out. He'll be out again. C.J. Daniels was out this game, but he probably will be returning, I think, for this week. At least he's projected to. But you had these guys stepping up in big moments. We saw Josh Moore get some more snaps to make an impact. Keelan Marion especially, not just this week, but last week as well, was Carson Beck's go-to target on 3rd and long. This week, of course, led the team in reception yards. And then Gerard Pringle is a guy that I really want to talk about because he was the offensive player of the game for Miami. He ripped off a 19-yard run touchdown later in the quarter, and he was dominant. He had 7.9 yards per carry, 1 touchdown, and it was coming up in a big moment because not only was Mark Fletcher out, but Jordan Lyle just not really his usual self. I'm assuming it's because he's still coming back from this injury that he had, and he's maybe just not the same player that he was, doesn't have that same twitch. And the running back room, if it isn't for Gerard Pringle right now, is not really looking in a good shape. Marty Brown, we know he's good on short yard situations, but he's more of like a bully back that goes straight up the middle. So you're not really having those explosive plays if it isn't for this true freshman in Gerard Pringle. So props to him.
Yeah, I mean, all those guys in the room, I know Mark Fletcher's been saying it, Marty Brown, he's been in the pressers, they all respect each other. They all know what they bring to the table. And when you got 4 or 5 guys that can be a solid running back and like you said, have that next man up mentality, it's gonna lead to success. And you saw that against Syracuse last Saturday.
And if you're wondering, as a Miami fan, why Gerard Pringle had not been seeing more touches earlier on in the season, because we actually did see flashes of him against Notre Dame, against Bethune-Cookman, I think. He did show some explosiveness earlier on. This is not the first time we're seeing him. Well, one, it's because he's a freshman running back, and you have to be able to be good at blocking if you want to get some significant reps. And it looks like now he's starting to be able to do that. But as a true freshman, you're not as well-sized as some of the other guys in that room. And so maybe Cristobal just didn't feel as comfortable with using him because you have to be a good blocker in his schemes. And I completely get that. Also, you have to learn the playbook. And I'm assuming by now that it's past the halfway point of the season. Gerard Pringle now has that down in his head. So I think the debate can now start. Can we see Gerard Pringle maybe get some more early on touches in the next game? Will we see more of an elevated role? Maybe leapfrog Marty Brown or Jordan Lyle in the depth chart, and maybe be the early down back now, starting off in the game against NC State. We'll see. I personally think that he's deserved that spot, but only Mario Cristobal will be the one to decide that.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And also later in that third quarter, you had the Carter Davis field goal to cap off the scoring in the third, which really set Miami out in front with a sizable lead going into the fourth.
Yeah, and then in the fourth quarter, after another interception for Miami, they had 3 turnovers on the day. Ricky Collins for Syracuse was just not good. 12 for 25, 0 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, 85 yards only. But Miami took advantage of it, and you can't blame them for it. But going into the fourth quarter, it was capped off by maybe the most memorable play of the whole game in the Francis Mauigoa gadget play that apparently had been devised 2 to 3 years back when Mauigoa first joined the team and signed to Miami. Carson Beck throws a backward pass to Mauigoa. He has blockers in front of him, and he just runs straight into the end zone without needing to really touch anyone, to Mauigoa's dismay, because he said later on in the post-game press conference he wanted to just absolutely ram someone while going into the end zone.
Yeah, I was actually just I was pulling that quote up, but you pretty much said it best. And it was interesting that they were they really like doing it 50 times. He said they practiced that like over 50 times, but it finally came that they were able to do it, and it got the crowd going, got the guys with the tarps off, hyped, and it was probably a big emphasis in that victory.
A big question, though, in the postgame after that was, did Miami use it at the right time? Because when you're up by that much against Syracuse and you have important games down the road against Pitt away, NC State is not an easy game whatsoever. You have Virginia Tech away, always a tough place to play in Blacksburg. And also earlier on in the season, if you had this play in the bag, in the arsenal for about 2 to 3 years now, why are you using it at this time? And I start to wonder, maybe it's because of how emotional this game was with Fran Brown on the other sideline. Maybe it's just more of an emotional decision to go ahead and use this. Me personally, don't know if you wanted to really show opposing defenses that you have this trick, because now you really can't use it anymore. I feel like it may have been a better time to utilize it earlier on or later in the season. But it's a good momentum booster for Miami for sure, if you want to take it away as a positive.
But I'm going to counter that, actually. Because how much do you think that would have worked when they're playing a really solid defense? I feel like it's a fun play to run. So I think you got to test that during when you're playing a weaker defense where it has a higher chance of actually working. And then maybe modify that against a tougher defense or an opponent down the road so that they don't really know what's coming. Those are just my thoughts on it.
If they can modify it, make it more nuanced, then yeah, absolutely. And maybe you are trying to just test it against a more inferior team. But we've been complaining in the past weeks of just how uncreative this offense was. And so I feel like if you really want to win back the fan base, you had to use that play earlier on.
Mm-hmm.
I know there's some media people out there complaining that, hey, it's already too late. You're already doing it when Miami's essentially out of the college football playoffs. It's meaningless to be using this play right now, so you just can't really advocate for it. But I do understand your point, and if Miami can still find a way to come up and use that maybe in a different way, then absolutely I'm all for it, and it definitely does help Miami in playing more loose, as Shannon Dawson said later on Monday. And then just some other takeaways was that Miami really did make Syracuse look like Miami in the past, and their fraudulent, kind of stagnant offensive selves in previous weeks. This is an exact quote from Syracuse.com. Turnovers, pre-snap penalties, and some conservative play calling cost Syracuse a chance to compete against the Hurricanes. If you just switched Syracuse and the Hurricanes in that sentence, I would have completely thought that was a sentence from a Miami article a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much say the same thing.
It's just Syracuse played almost exactly like Miami did against Louisville, against SMU, and that's all to Miami's credit. They won the penalty battle for the first time all season. Miami had only 5 penalties for 54 yards. Still not amazing, but Syracuse had 8 penalties for 65 yards, so they won that battle. And actually, there is a cool story behind this. Carson Beck returned to a clapping snap instead of lifting his leg like he usually does, and that, I guess, really helped the offense in getting a rhythm going and helping the offensive line, because they can't really see when Carson Beck lifts his leg. So the clapping was really an auditory cue, which really helped in Miami's favor. So that was good. And then also they won the yardage battle, of course, 385 to 285. And maybe most importantly, they won the turnover battle, which is something that I think if you're going to win a game, a key indicator of wins or losses is the turnover margins.
It really seemed like Mario Cristobal wanted to stick it to Fran Brown. I questioned the team. We were up like 31-3 and midway through the fourth quarter. I questioned, why wasn't Emory Williams on the field? Why are we gonna 31-3 and it just the defense is playing spectacular? I didn't think Syracuse would come back regardless. I think maybe Emory Williams should have won in the game, but it seemed like Mario Cristobal was sending a message, not only Syracuse but the entire ACC, that to look out for Miami down the road. I don't know your thoughts on the quarterback situation, putting Emory Williams there. Was it the right call to keep Carson back in? What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know maybe if it was the right call to keep Carson back in, but it really proved to be futile anyway.
Uh-huh.
I mean, he wasn't really getting any much pressure besides early on that first quarter, so you weren't really risking him getting hurt. You know, they weren't putting him in Jaden Daniels situations where he was running RPOs and schemes where he could really get his head taken off. So, you know, like we've seen him slide before. He does not take any chances.
Yeah.
Right?
Unlike Jackson Dart of the Giants.
Yeah.
We know that. We know what happened last weekend.
Tough week for you. Right?
Yep.
But you were talking about Fran Brown, and I hate to say it, but I honestly do think Fran Brown is a good coach for how much of a villain he is to Miami. And he, I think, will be the Syracuse guy for many years to come if he doesn't find a job with a higher standing. Because I think this year for him is an aberration. You got to throw it out the window. They're 3-7. Last year they were 9-3. And I think this season would have gone much more differently if they had Steve Angeli not get injured. Went down with an Achilles injury against Syracuse in their 4th week of the season. And that really kind of derailed the whole season. They're winless since then. Ricky Collins and Joe Filardi have been abysmal at quarterback in both of their appearances that they've had over the course of those games that they've played and that have equated to losses. And Fran Brown just seems like a leader of men. He seems like a guy that, sure, it's a very audacious, bombastic personality that he has, but if you're playing for him, you gobble it up. You love it. And he just seems like a guy that you want to go to war with if you're in that Syracuse uniform. and he is a great recruiter of talent, just like Mario Cristobal is. Somehow is able to get a lot of guys from South Florida into his team. We've seen it with Tadarius Hughes, who just recently flipped, and then most infamously Calvin Russell, the 5-star from Miami's backyard that he was somehow able to take down him to Upper New York. And there's also just some moments in this game too that, mostly after the game, that were really head scratching from Fran Brown, and will definitely keep him as a polarized figure from Miami's side going forward. One of them being Michael Irvin's whole interaction with him. I don't know if you saw that, but Michael Irvin posted it. It was basically him just congratulating Fran Brown, and Fran Brown was like, "Hey, just so you know, don't get used to this. We're gonna come back later on." Like, you just like, dude, just take it with dignity. But so that was a pretty bizarre move by him. And then he had a spat with the fan post game that went viral, where a fan was maybe being a little bit rude to him, a little disrespectful, but he was saying, stay stinky. You're not gonna take another shower this week, because his turn of phrase last year is that he doesn't shower when he loses. So it looked like Fran Brown was being somewhat of a good sport by it, because he was smiling the whole time, but he did still interact with the fan and give him some grief. So I think the fact that he even engaged with the fan showed that he didn't really take the higher ground there, and so kind of stooped down a little bit. But once again, if you're a player, you kind of love that. And then also, maybe the most disagreeable thing that he did, in my opinion, was that after the game, he said Miami was ready to quit at the brink of halftime before they went on the 2-touchdown run. And just like, dude, come on, bro. Like, he's trying to make all these excuses and show how good his team did. You just got to give some credit to Miami, I think, when credit is due. And he didn't really own up to that, in my opinion. But
That doesn't even sound like a very media trained answer per se. If I was Fran Brown, I wouldn't have said that, but he let the emotions get the best of him, and yep. And I think with that, Liam, do you want to segue into the college football playoff situation?
yeah, so we did talk on some negatives there for Miami, but overall it was a net positive game, and it was a reassuring performance that got Miami back on track and still somehow keeps them in the mix for this college football playoffs. And it still is a murky and very complex, very circuitous path to that 12-team bracket to get in there, but it is still narrowly possible. And after what happened last night on Tuesday with the college football ranking release, it does seem that this committee still holds Miami in somewhat of a high regard, and that could really help in Miami's favor down the stretch if they can take care of business. So let's get into our release reactions of what happened Tuesday, and then also just the outlook of what needs to happen for Miami to eventually get into the college football playoffs come the end of November. So starting off, Miami was originally ranked 18th last week going into Syracuse. Now, after the 28-point win, they are 15th. But most importantly, they are projected to make the playoff in the bracket. They're going to play number 6, Texas Tech, as the 11th seed, because they are projected as the ACC champs. That's kind of weird to me, because I don't think this will be the case. If anything, if Miami does eventually secure a playoff spot, I think it will be because they secure an at-large bid rather than the automatic ACC championship bid. And also, when you look at it, there are some teams in the ACC that are not going to be too happy with this. And I think it is safe to say now that Miami may be the most hated team in the ACC, at least by Georgia Tech, Virginia, and Louisville, who have been ranked below them after this week. Georgia Tech is now one spot behind Miami at 16th. Virginia is 19th, and Louisville dropped down to 20th. And I would just say, at the very least, first of all, the committee is showing some consistency in having complete disregard whatsoever for head-to-heads. We saw that at the beginning, where they did not take Miami's head-to-head win against Notre Dame into account at all. They ranked them 8 spots below the Fighting Irish. But then they're staying consistent with that and ranking Louisville below Miami, who obviously has the head-to-head advantage over the Hurricanes. So good thing on that at least. But in my message to the ACC fan bases that now hate Miami, I would just say hold the negative feelings right now, because there could be a possibility that by the end of this season, Miami is the only team that makes it from the ACC into the playoffs, and they could be the entire saviors of the conference. So I'd hold the hatred for right now. Here's the scenario, right? There's a possibility that there is no ACC championship automatic bid for the entire conference going into the playoffs if, and this is really the only thing that needs to happen, if Duke wins the conference. Because they currently are 8-4 right now. Or no, sorry.
They could be 8-4.
They could be 8-4. They're 5-4 right now. But only one of those losses is a conference loss. They just had an absolutely horrible demise to UConn over the last weekend. Really bad look for the ACC in general there. And a really bad look for the Blue Devils as well. But if they somehow win the ACC title, which is very possible considering that their run of games from here on out is pretty fairly easy, and all they really have to do is just beat Virginia, their hardest game left on the schedule, and beat Georgia Tech in the ACC championship, and all of a sudden they're the champions of the ACC, but they have 4 losses, and then you could have two teams from the group of 5 enter in above them in James Madison from the Sun Belt, who only have 1 loss on the season, and then likely either South Florida or Navy, who each have 2 losses apiece from the American Athletic Conference, leapfrog the ACC and go into that.
Yeah, I just think for Duke, it's kind of a joke if they made the college football playoff. If you're an 8-4 team, a 4-loss team does not deserve to be in the college football playoff. There's so many teams that are going to be 10-2, 11-1, or like that's really what you look at. 10-2 teams, kind of like the cutoff there, and it would just I think the committee has a lot of conversations to deal with if that happens. Once again, it's going to be a crazy 3-4 weeks left in the season, and only time will tell what's going to happen.
And I think that would be more of an indictment on the ACC if Duke somehow does win the ACC title, just because of how unpredictable the conference has been and the fact that the teams have been beating each other up. You just saw Cal beat Louisville when they were traveling all the way from Berkeley to the Derby City over the weekend. You saw Wake Forest beat Virginia in one of the most boring games of all season. And so there really is just no clear-cut juggernaut in this league, and that's going to seem to be to the ACC's demise if nothing changes. And so Miami really needs to take care of business, win these next 3 games in convincing style to really prove a point that they are the team that could advance from the ACC as an at-large bid and be the saviors of the conference going into the playoffs. So here is the chain of events that needs to happen, besides obviously winning out convincingly. Miami basically needs the teams in front of them right now to lose. The teams that are on the bubble, that are not currently in the bracket, but could be, they need to lose the games that they probably should be losing. So we're going to start off with Pittsburgh, who could really be the entire giant killers of the season in these next 3 weeks because they have 2 really pivotal matchups. And I just recommend, if you're a Miami fan, maybe consider trading that orange and green out for the blue and gold for these next 2 weeks until November 29th when we play them. Because they start off playing Notre Dame this weekend. It's going to be a college game day appearance. They're going to be at home. Huge game for that because Notre Dame is the number 9 seed. It would really help out Miami and really bolster Pittsburgh as a team, which would make it even better if Miami can end up beating them head-to-head later on in the season because it would show that Pittsburgh is a really good ranked team that has a lot of credit for as a team overall if Miami can beat them. Although, that being said, not looking like they're going to be offering much help to Miami. Should be really optimistic about that after Pat Narduzzi maybe having some of the softest comments from a head coach I've ever heard. He basically said he could lose 110-3 to the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, and it wouldn't even matter because they're only concentrated on the conference games, which is just so soft from a head coach at a Power 4 football program. Like, what are you doing, dude?
You should want to win every game, period. It doesn't matter who you're playing. You should want to go. Every team's goal is to win, period. And I think Notre Dame has played half the ACC, and I think that's something the committee has to think about when they're selecting things. And if it does come down to head-to-head, Miami beat Notre Dame. That's final.
Yeah. And we talk about being media trained. Maybe the ACC just doesn't have people that can train these coaches because Fran Brown, obviously not that well media trained. Pat Narduzzi now too. Like, just say something basic like, "Oh yeah, we're gonna try to beat every opponent in front of us." Like, that's all you have to say. And you go out here saying, "Oh yeah, we could lose 110-3." Like, what does that show to your teammates, to your players, of you as a head coach and your mentality? That's just kind of weird to me. But then also they play Georgia Tech on November 22nd. That will be a huge game, too, that you're hoping Pitt can win because it'll make them even look more glamorous in the eyes of the committee heading into that final game versus Miami, which, hey, maybe by then that could be a college game day appearance once again because of just how important that matchup could be overall. Pitt will definitely be a ranked team, maybe a top 15 ranked team, if they can beat both Notre Dame and Georgia Tech down in these next 2 weeks. And so you're hoping that they can do that. And then also we're going to need some help from our SEC friends because Texas plays Georgia next weekend at night. You're hoping right now Texas is ranked number 10. They are currently projected to be in the bracket. They play 2 games in the next 3 weeks. They play 3 games, but there are 2 games that could really be a decisive factor in if they get in or not. Starts off with Georgia, then they play a really easy game after that. I forget against who. But then they finish off their season against Texas A&M. So they are a 2-loss team right now. All they really have to do is lose one of those games. And I think that's very, very realistic. They are probably going to lose both, in my opinion. Georgia is number 5 seed in the country. Texas A&M is the number 3 seed in the country, and they're undefeated. So Texas really just has to drop one of those, and they are away at Georgia this week. They're going to be in Athens, and that's going to be really helpful for Miami if they can win out and stay with only 2 losses compared to the Longhorns' 3. I'm sure that Miami will be able to leapfrog them in the standings if Texas can drop one. Same applies for Oklahoma, who has the head-to-head loss against Texas. They are also at 2 losses on the season. They play Alabama this weekend. Very tough game there where I don't think Oklahoma will come out victorious at all. After that, if they do win, that's not going to be great because they play Missouri and LSU for their final 2 games. Those games are both situations in which they are favored. So you're hoping that they can drop it to Alabama, which I think is very possible. I would say Miami probably has a very high spread in that game. They're probably favored by a heavy amount. And then also, Vanderbilt ranked 1 spot above Miami currently at the number 14 spot. They play Tennessee this weekend, and this is really they play Tennessee on the last weekend of the season, and that could be a really important game because Vanderbilt only has 2 games of college football left. They have a bye week over this next stretch of 3 weeks, so they really have 2 games that they play. One of those is against Kentucky, who is a bottom-level SEC team. They'll probably sweep the floor with them. And then their last one is against the Tennessee Volunteers, who are pretty much already out of it with 3 losses. Vanderbilt, though, has 2. If they lose to Tennessee in the last game of the season, that will be a very good sign for Miami if they can once again win all 3 games. And that'll most likely take Vanderbilt out of it. And then also, 2 more teams that I want to highlight here. Utah, who's at number 13, and then BYU, who is at number 12. You need Utah to lose 1 more as well. They're also teetering on the edge with 2 losses. Same with the BYU Cougars. You want Utah to lose to either Baylor on November 15th, and then they play both Kansas teams to end off the season, Kansas State, and then the Jayhawks. I think it's most likely that they're going to lose to Baylor, if anything, or maybe in the Big 12 championship. But who knows if the committee will discredit them if they get all the way to the Big 12 championship. You just don't know. And then BYU, they play TCU, and then at Cincinnati on November 22nd. That will be a huge game as well. I think Cincinnati should be favored in that. Hopefully they can take care of business, and that will knock BYU out of it. And then they play UCF to end off the season, which should be a cakewalk. So you're hoping that those 2 teams also drop 1 game there, which could really catapult Miami to a high seed.
What I can tell you, Liam, is that I love the madness in November when it comes to college football. A lot of things to be done. But now Miami has to focus on going 1-0 every week, something that Mario Cristobal and the players say a lot. And, they say a lot. But now let's talk about the NC State. What can we see out of this NC State team?
Yeah, I'm not feeling all that confident in Miami going into this if they cannot change in their ways of starting early or starting slow early on in the game. They are currently 5-4. The Wolfpack are 2-3 in the ACC, but not something you can take for granted because they just came off of an upset against Georgia Tech 2 weeks ago, and now they are rolling into Miami fresh off of a bye week, so they've had 2 weeks to prepare for this team. And I would say this is going to be a huge test for Miami's defensive unit. And with NC State averaging 32.4 points per game in the 4th-ranked offense in the ACC, you have to expect more than 20 points. So that being said, for Miami's offense, you have to score probably 25 or more, which is something that they have not been able to do in both of their losses. They scored only 21 against Louisville and then 20 against SMU. That's going to have to change if you want to beat NC State. We're going to have to see more of that explosive offense that we saw in the second half against Syracuse if we want to have a chance in this game, because if they do start slow, the defense won't be able to bail them out, I don't think. And it will be an ugly sight to see. And Beck is going to probably have to go shot for shot with Bailey like it's a 21st birthday party at Regatta. If you want to stay in this game, I'm just being honest. It's going to be tough.
It really comes down to the quarterback play. I think here, CJ Bailey's 4th in the ACC with 2,411 passing yards. Liam, can you guess who's 5th?
No.
It's Carson Beck.
Okay.
So pretty close in passing yards, but CJ Bailey, you have the threat of his legs. Something that Miami was able to tame early in the season with the mobile quarterback in Byron Brown. But I think CJ Bailey has another level of explosiveness to him, and he absolutely torched Georgia Tech 2 weeks ago on his legs. I think he had a very good showing, rolling out of the pocket a lot and getting downfield when needed to be. And I think if Miami can do what they did against USF to contain Byron Brown, I think they'll have some. They should be able to contain Bailey.
And if they can't, I think this is shaping up to be the CJ Bailey game.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't want it to be, because the storylines going into this are all going to be spotlighting him. He is a player that is from Miami, and he's going to be looking to stunt on his hometown He's having a chip on his shoulder with Miami not recruiting him into the last month of his window, and by then it was already too late. He was already committed to the Wolfpack. He actually went to school with JoJo Trader at Chaminade Madonna. Another player that he was throwing to was Jeremiah Smith. So now it's just kind of a what if Miami did recruit him. Hey, maybe what if Jeremiah Smith had followed him to Miami? Who knows? But we can't really go down that path anymore. And also, another thing to monitor is this could be a potential audition for CJ Bailey going to Miami this weekend because they're going to need a quarterback. We know Carson Beck is his last year of eligibility, and he's most definitely going to the NFL. There have been some names thrown around there, and Lenore Sellers. And CJ Bailey is another one of those names. He's a sophomore right now. Will still have some eligibility going into next year. I just watch out for it. I feel like this could be a game where he inflicts some revenge on Miami if they're not careful, and it could get ugly real fast. He's third in the ACC in passing as well. So, very dangerous player. And then also, not good for Miami, they're getting their two best playmakers on offense back in Hollywood Smothers, who's the best running back in the ACC, averaging over 100 yards per game. He's been better than Isaac Brown, who caused so many problems for Miami last time they played against Louisville. Also, they have Duke Scott as the other running back. This may be the best running back tandem that we've seen in the ACC. Scott just poured 196 yards and one touchdown from 24 carries in his last game against Georgia Tech. Very good running back as well. And then Justin Jolie, who is maybe one of the best tight ends, not just in the ACC, but also in the nation. And he come back from injury, got healthy after the bye week, and he could be at full force and at full effect for NC State coming up this weekend.
You mentioned the running back room. You mentioned the tight end room. They also do have a solid receiver room. Teddy Hoffman, freshman, 74 yards in that game, and Noah Rogers, 72 yards on seven receptions. So they have a explosive offense, but what do you see on the defensive end from them?
Yeah, this is something that Miami could take advantage of because the defense is a huge weak point. A lot of vulnerabilities. The last time Miami played NC State was in 2023. They lost 20-16, and that was a way different NC State team where their defense was actually way better than their offense. That's not the case. It's completely flipped now because they are 15th in the ACC out of 17 teams in scoring, allowing 31 points per game on the defensive side. They're allowing 425 yards per game, and they are allowing 292 pass yards per game as well. Miami is only allowing 197, which is third in the ACC. Miami is only allowing 15 points per game for reference as well, which is first in the ACC. So just a completely different tale of two teams there on defense. And they have the worst opponent third down conversion rate as well. And Miami has one of the best third down conversion rates in the ACC. So a lot of things playing into Miami's favor on that side. They're also last in sacks, and they are last in forced fumbles. So the turnover battle is something that Miami should be able to win. Granted, Carson Beck doesn't throw a lot of interceptions. Hopefully he doesn't. And the special teams is also a disaster for the team. They're last in punt return yards. They are 15th in kickoff returns, 15th in extra points, and 16th, second to last, in field goals. They're only 5 for 8 on the entire year. So, not great for them. That's a 62.5 percentage. By reference, Miami is 91% from that range. So, unlike Miami, Dave Doran, the NC State head coach, his teams have, however, been consistently well done down the stretch. They are 15-6 in the month of November. Cristobal is, of course, 4-9 in that same month. So that is something to monitor as well. NC State notoriously turns it up a notch towards the end of the year. Miami kind of comes down a little bit. So that's another something to really keep your eye on going into this game as well. And, Miami does lead the all-time series 11-6 with one tie. But, like I said, the Wolfpack won their most recent meeting, and they're going to be hungry going into this one, looking to play spoiler because they're already pretty much out of the ACC title race.
Yeah, just going on to my final thoughts. I think it's gonna be a shootout for both sides, and I think it's gonna come down. It's gonna come down to whichever offense is stronger, in my opinion. But I do think on the defensive end, Miami does have a stronger defense, so that can help them a lot. Anything from you before we go into score predictions?
I think this game will come down to the quarterback play. Carson Beck will need to be airing out the ball most likely. You need to get the running game going. Hopefully, Gerard Pringle can be another impactful presence as well. But we just know how good TJ Bailey is going to be. And there's really only so much you can do as a secondary against it. You can try to limit him all you want, but he's still going to find a way to score some points. So it's just how can Carson Beck respond to that because the defense can only do so much. And then my last point is you got to win the penalty battle rather once again. You won it last week against Syracuse. Hopefully, you can carry that over and not reset the page this time around. They are 54 penalties on the season for NC State in total. That's 58 yards per game. Miami has 69 penalties on the season. That is 9th and 11th in the ACC, respectively. So they're both middle of the pack in that aspect, and you're just hoping that with the home crowd around them, NC State's traveling to a hostile environment. They're 1-3 on the road this season. That can play a factor, and they can catch a few penalties going for Miami's way this weekend.
Yeah, we gotta do the score predictions before we talk with our Cory Smith. I'm gonna go myself. 30. This is right off the dome. 33-30. I think this will be a really close game, a shootout, kind of like Louisville. Not this season, but the season before. Liam, what do you think?
Yeah, I really like that prediction. I am gonna say it's gonna be upper 20s for NC State. They're gonna find a way to get that ball into the end zone. I'm gonna say it's gonna be 28 for the Wolfpack, and I'm gonna have to give Miami the edge. I'm gonna say they're gonna score 34 just because of how dreadful this defense really has been for NC State, and that could really end up being the advantage that Miami gets. So 34-28 for me.
All right, perfect. Before we end this episode, we have an interview with our Cory Smith coming up, so stay tuned and we'll be right back. Welcome back to TMH Sportscast. We're joined by Cory Smith from 24/7's Pack Pride podcast. Cory, thank you for coming on the show.
Yes, sir. Appreciate you guys having me.
Of course, we're really excited to preview this Miami NC State game. Feeling a little bit uneasy as Canes fans because of how potent this NC State offense can be. So just heading into Saturday afternoon, what's the overall pulse of the Wolfpack's fan base? If you can get a sense of it, do NC State fans still perceive the Hurricanes to be the hardest team to play in the ACC, or has the mystique of Miami somewhat worn off since October 17th, and are most in Raleigh now confidently projecting another upset win?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the biggest thing is, going on the road is never easy in the ACC. And obviously, facing a team like Miami with the offense that they have, the big question mark is going to be if they have Mark Fletcher coming into this game. And if they do, then that changes things. But sounds like he's probably not going to play. So that changes the perception going into this one as far as what you're going to face in this offense. But defensively, this is still one of the toughest teams in the entire ACC, if not the country. I mean, they rank top 15 in nearly every metric. When it comes to stopping teams against the pass, when it comes to stopping teams against the run. So for NC State, yes, this offense has been very good. Obviously, it was against Georgia Tech, and it has been at home. Now it's about figuring out how to make that travel on the road and going against this defense. I think that's what makes this still one of the more difficult matchups. Carson Beck has been up and down, but this defense has kept their teams in every single game. I think NC State is going to have its hands full against that.
NC State's currently fourth in the ACC in scoring, averaging around 32 points per game. And a large part of that has been because of CJ Bailey, their quarterback, where it looks like a lot of the attention will be turned towards him with this game, with him being at the epicenter of all the homecoming, revenge game storylines. But that does not seem to be the case for CJ Bailey himself after he just had a recent press conference earlier today saying that he's not going to let this phase him at all. He has no negative animosity towards Miami whatsoever. What do you make of his comments and where his headspace may be going into this?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's saying all the right things going into this one, but I think it is still a personal game for him. I mean, this is a Miami team that, kind of overlooked him throughout high school. I mean, we saw, a similar storyline with, this past week against Georgia Tech when Duke Scott, who was coming out of Georgia Tech really didn't recruit him, and he ran for over 200 yards against them total. So, for CJ Bailey, yes, you want to go back into Miami. You want to perform well. Maybe it's not a revenge game. Maybe he's not looking at it as that, but you want to perform well in front of your biggest fans, which is most of your family, all your former high school teammates. So I know he wants to go out there and do everything he possibly can to lift NC State in this game.
And there's been some whispers going around that CJ Bailey might be a potential successor to Carson Beck at quarterback for Miami next year. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I mean, never say never. But I think for NC State, the big thing right now is trying to figure out a way to keep him in Raleigh. But obviously the money is going to be pretty big, and we know that he's a guy that wants to go to the NFL after 3 years. And the perception over the past few months has been that he has a chance to be a first round pick, if not a second day guy, if he goes out in the draft next year. So what better to do to go to somewhere like Miami and continue to lift your stock? And obviously the money's probably going to be better at Miami, I think, is the big thing that we're finding out now. But for CJ Bailey, it's going to be about going out there and doing the best you can right now to put your stock as high as you possibly can for anywhere. If the NC State offer is high enough, competitive enough, maybe he sticks around. But it's going to be about trying to figure out where that is for him.
Now, obviously, some injuries on the side of NC State. Do you think it's going to be more of a pass-heavy game or a run-heavy game? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be balanced for NC State going into this one because they will get Justin Jolie back. It sounds like, and Hollywood Smothers was back at practice, has been back for the last few days. Was out there after the bye, or during the bye week for a little bit too. So it sounds like they should be getting back both of those players. And then the big thing is going to be the fact that Terrell Anderson, who had a pretty significant drop the last time out. Where's his headspace at? Is he going to be a significant factor in this one? And then, now we've seen Duke Scott perform. Now we've seen Hollywood Smothers obviously already perform throughout the season. So how well do they do in terms of a tandem when they go out there? And, how much is Miami going to allow them to run? I think that's the biggest thing. This Miami defense has been extremely good at stopping the run and not allowing chunk yardage. For NC State, they have an explosive running back. They have an explosive passer. They have several explosive weapons, but are they able to do that? I think they're going to try to see them balanced. I don't think you're going to see them lean on one or the other. But are they able to find that balance against Miami's defense? Is going to be the big question.
In the lead up, head coach Dave Doran did definitely say that this will be the hardest defense that NC State has gone up against all season. So that definitely will be something to monitor. But then switching sides of the ball for NC State, it has been somewhat of a disappointing season so far statistically on the defensive side. So how can the Wolfpack adjust behind the ball to limit Carson Beck and his playmakers around him?
Yeah, I mean, for the defense, it's really about limiting explosive plays. I mean, that's what Miami does well, particularly in the passing game, particularly with Malachi Tony. The running game, they don't have as many big explosive runs, but for NC State, it's been about tackling. It's been about making the plays that are in front of you. They fit the gaps, but sometimes miss tackles, and then sometimes they'll just completely miss gaps and give up huge explosive runs. What they did so well against Georgia Tech, and I think they need to do against Miami, is don't allow those explosive plays to end up in the end zone. Because if you're able to stop a team at the red zone, force them to have to be able to score around the red zone, force them to have to score on short yardage plays, things along those lines, NC State's able to have success and limit teams to 3 instead of 7 on each and every drive.
And we know a large part of NC State's success has been some of their main guys. Hollywood Smothers is the best running back in the ACC, no question about it. Justin Jolie, not only one of the best tight ends in the ACC, but maybe the entire country. And of course, CJ Bailey as well. But what are some more under the radar guys, some of the not established stars on this team that could be really important and X factors for the Wolfpack, both on the offensive side and the defensive side?
Yeah, I mentioned Terrell Anderson earlier. I think he has a chance to have a breakout game in this one. He's had a couple breakout games this season, but it hasn't really been the mainstay in the ACC. He was top 10 in the ACC in terms of yards earlier in the season, but has taken a little bit of a backseat to the running game here in recent weeks. So he could have a potential breakout game. Another one, too, Teddy Hoffman, a guy that comes out of the Florida area, initially committed to FAU, ends up flipping to NC State right at the end there. He's had a couple big games, particularly the first game against ECU. And he's had a few games where, the last game he actually had a big explosive play where he got left wide open and was able to run it in for a touchdown. And in terms of the running game, I would say Duke Scott is another one. Just came off of a ACC running back of the week 2 weeks ago. In that game against Georgia Tech. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him have another good game. Obviously, Hollywood Smothers being back is going to limit how much he does, but I think he has a chance to have another good game against Miami, particularly if he's able to get some, big bruising runs and try to get some red zone touches as well. And then on the defensive side of the football, Brandon Cleveland, another guy that's from the Florida area, coming back home. Caden Fordham, another guy that's from the Florida area, coming back home. They're going to want to prove themselves in this game and not miss tackles, not have big explosive plays ran against them. So I'm looking for them to try to make some big plays. Brandon Cleveland has been one of their better defensive players. Miami actually tried to pull him away this past offseason. They didn't end up pulling him away, but NC State holds on to him. And then, Caden Fordham, like I said, a guy that initially was playing safety at the high school level, comes to NC State, currently leads the country in tackles, before this past weekend with 92. So he'll be somebody that NC State is definitely going to be leaning on in this game to try to stop the run, try to limit what they're able to do across the middle of the field.
And coming off a good home win against Georgia Tech, the Wolfpack are 1-3 on the road. Could a hostile away environment significantly shape the outcome of this game?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be, how much does the Miami fan base show up? Obviously the last 2 games or 2 of the last 4 games they've lost. So there's some frustration there, but they typically do at least fill out the lower bowl and it'll be for NC State. I think it's about trying to get off to a hot start. I mean, the thing is the past few games where they've really struggled on the road has been they haven't been able to get things going offensively, and they've allowed other teams to set the tone early on. This is a Miami team that really hasn't set the tone in the last few weeks, in particular last 2 games. Only 2 offensive touchdowns in the first in the first half in both the last 2 games, and really struggled to be able to get things going offensively. So for NC State, it's about trying to go in there, set the tone early on. That's where the struggles have been, and I think if one of these two teams is able to figure out how to set the tone early on, that's probably going to be who's going to win the game.
And before we let you go, what's your score prediction for the game on Saturday?
Yeah, I mean, I've been going back and forth. I think it's probably going to end up being Miami that wins this one, but I think it's going to be a little tighter than what Vegas has. I think Vegas is at it at like 14.5. It's kind of been going back between 14.5 and 15.5.
Yeah.
I think this is a game that probably hits the under because, again, I don't think either team really gets, explosives early on, and both are trying to feel each other out. But I think ultimately Miami is able to get some big gashing plays in the second half and win this one. I'm going to say 31-21 is where I've been going with this one. So that's what I'll keep it at.
Well, we're both in agreement, Cory, because we also believe the key to the game for Miami is not a slow start either. NC State was really good at that in their last game 2 weeks ago against Georgia Tech. They jumped out to a 14-7 lead in the first quarter, scoring their first 2 opening drives. So that is something that will be key for Miami and also key for NC State as well, whoever can win that battle. But with that, we'll let you go to cover NC State men's hoops, which is tipping off tonight at 8 p.m. against UNC Greensboro. Should be an exciting winter in Raleigh with all the buzz surrounding the basketball program, led by the newly minted head coach and Will Wade. He's kind of establishing this new culture, got an influx of talent that he's bringing in. Real quickly, how are the state of affairs right now for the Wolfpack in basketball?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a lot of fun to cover this, all offseason, obviously a lot of build up to what's expected to be happening here. A lot of newness in the ACC, obviously, some newness there at Miami, some newness at Florida State as well. So plenty of newness to the entire conference. And I think Will Wade is trying to really set the tone early on that this is a team that has a chance in the ACC. You have a roster that can do it. Now it's about putting it all together on the court. There's still some chemistry things they're trying to work on the defensive end of the floor, but the offense has been humming early on. So,
well, Cory, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. And that'll do it for this episode of the Miami Hurricanes Sportscast. Hurricanes take on NC State at 3:30 on Saturday at the Hard Rock for the final time in their last game of this home game of the season. So thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you same time next week, Canes fans.